Share screen. Window. There we are. Yeah, that was a bit of fun again. Welcome everybody. I wish I could see some of your faces, so I'll just have to assume that you're all there smiling and jolly. 5 tips for combining OKRs with agile. And as my friend Kevin Henney pointed out, you could think of that as okra. So hence the okra joke here, OKRs and agile. I always apologize when I give a talk for the first time, and this is a new talk. You're the first audience to see this. Problem with a new talk is they haven't been completely debugged yet. Until they've run 3 or 4 times, they're not really debugged. So apologies for that. On the upside, you get something completely new and hopefully innovative. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, one more further ado. I'm an author. I have books to sell. I'm going to give away a couple of copies of my books, the latest 2 books, Succeeding with OKRs and Agile, like this year's book, and the book that seems a long time ago, Art of Agile Product Ownership, because it was published a few weeks before the world turned upside down. So it kind of got lost in all of that. I have to remind myself that we published that book. So while you're watching this, if you wander over to my website on that URL, put in your email address and name. If we have time, we'll do a draw at the end of the presentation. More likely, we'll be talking and taking questions, and you'll have to trust me to do a draw tomorrow. I will contact the winners directly and arrange to send you the books. So just wander over when you're ready. Now, without any further ado, let's get on to 5 tips for Agile OKRs. You'll notice this talk is purposely designed to try and fit within 20 minutes. So I now have to persuade myself that this will fit and I don't really need to rush. I've timed it. It should work. Okay. So the first tip, you can think about your OKRs as test first management for the team. In the same way that when you are writing some code, you sit down and you write your unit tests. How are we going to test this thing? The same way that as a product owner type person, you think, how am I going to test this? What are the acceptance criteria going to be? OKRs, you can think of as test first management. Here is our objective, or as I prefer to say, outcome, the outcome you're looking for. What's the outcome we're looking for? And how are we going to check whether we meet that outcome? What are our tests going to be? You define that at the start of normally the quarter. You then spend the rest of the quarter executing against that. And then at the end, you check to see if you've passed. And hopefully, if you know what you're trying to do, then what you do won't be too far from it. So think of OKRs as test first management for the team. In setting your outcomes and your key results, you're actually creating space for a team. You're creating space for the team to have autonomy. You know, we talk about space and we think about that wide open space up there above the clouds. But what actually makes space? What makes space is the walls, is the boundaries of that space. Without those boundaries, you've just got something and you don't know where it is. Where does it start and end? And that's what OKRs do for a team. OKRs allow a team to paint a boundary around them and to say to the organization, this is what you can expect from us this quarter. This team exists for a purpose. The OKRs tell you in this quarter what you can expect from this team. And if this starts to sound familiar, because it's almost like putting an API on the team, it's almost like saying, here's our team, here's what our outputs are going to be. Maybe you want to define the inputs as well. So it's an API for the team. It allows the team to define their own space. Within that space, the team have autonomy. The team can pursue those outcomes however they like. How the team get to those outcomes isn't really that important. It's achieving the outcomes. It's the what, not the how again. Yes, it's the outcome that's important. So the OKRs define expectations like an API. Tip number 2, favor white space OKRs over cascading OKRs. That may sound a bit complicated, but I'll explain. There's a tendency to see OKRs pretty much as we see traditional management by objective. There is somebody at the top of our organization, almost certainly a male, who will give orders, objectives to their reports. So they hand out the objectives to people, and the people at the next level define the objectives, the orders for the people for the layer below them. And so it goes, and so it cascades down. That's what we traditionally did in management by objective. And unfortunately, a lot of people look at OKRs and think it's the same. To the degree that I actually characterize this as cascading OKRs. The idea that you can take your OKRs and then you can pass OKRs to the people below you. That isn't the way we want to work with OKRs and agile, for one rather obvious reason. It's not agile, is it? If people are telling you what to deliver, it's not promoting self-organization, it's not promoting self-management, it's not promoting autonomy. So if you work in this cascading OKRs fashion, it's almost like stepping back to the land of command and control. So we don't want to do this. We don't use OKRs as management by objective. We need a different model. So in the OKR model, we want to see our leaders as people who are talking about our destination, where we are going. They're talking about the purpose. Maybe they're talking about multiple missions within the organization. They're painting a picture of a shining city on a hill that is motivating us all to want to be there. And remember that since we now live in a post-project world and everyone's running Spotify teams or safe teams or simply no projects teams or whatever method you want to take, I think there's a general exception, a general understanding now, even if you keep the language of projects, that you have products and teams support products and those teams are long-standing. So undoubtedly you will form up some temporary teams from time to time. But for most products, you have standing teams. So our leaders tell us where we're going. They maybe outline the strategy. And then the teams, which are already existing, they need to respond to that. The leaders don't fill in the details. Quite the contrary. The leaders deliberately leave white space. Now, that may seem a bit negligent to you, but if the leaders and the leadership team were to fill in that white space, it wouldn't leave any space for autonomy. It would just be instructions and objectives cascading down the organization. So leaders deliberately leave space for the teams to fill in. And they say to the teams, how can you help us? This is where we want to go to. This is the purpose we want to fulfill. This is the benefit we want to deliver. This is how we're going to improve society. How can you, the teams in our organization with your skills and your products, how can you move us forward here? And the teams respond and the teams come back with their OKRs and they say, in this quarter, we will do 1, 2, 3, ABC, whatever you want to call it. Now, this is not going to be the bottom telling the top what they're going to do. Same way as before, we didn't want the top telling the bottom. We don't want to just flip it around. This is collaboration. We want our teams to be talking to the leaders and saying to the leaders, these are the OKRs we're looking to set. What do you think? Give us some feedback on this. Is this what you're expecting? Can you see how we might improve this? And it's not just the leaders in the organization they're talking to. They need to talk and collaborate with other teams who depend on them or they depend on. And maybe they need to talk to some customers directly about this. It's a collaboration exercise setting OKRs, but it needs to be driven by the teams. The senior leaders set the massive goals, purpose, aims of the organization, and the teams respond. If the teams don't respond, if the teams are railroaded into one set of OKRs or another, they're not really going to feel ownership of those OKRs. They aren't going to be enthusiastic about them. So we want white space OKRs moving up the organization rather than management by objective OKRs coming down the organization. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, very day-to-day, down-to-earth. Review your OKRs every sprint. I've heard advice given that there should be a checkpoint in your OKR cycle, which is normally a quarter, could be a different period. People advocate checking in on your OKRs at, say, the halfway point. Well, that's fine, that's good advice. But if you're doing sprints, if you're running in an agile fashion, if you've got some regular cadence like sprint planning and sprint review, then look at the OKRs in the sprint review. Every sprint should be building towards your OKRs. So there's our typical sprint, which I know you know and love. So right at the start of the 2-week sprint, the planning meeting, get your OKRs out. When you're planning the work you're planning needs to be driven by your OKRs. If you're going to make progress against OKRs, they aren't something that happens in addition to the sprint. They are the driving force behind the sprint. So review your OKRs, let them drive the work. During the sprint, the OKRs are there to reinforce your focus. They are a reason to say to people, no, we're not going to do something. No, we're not going to let ourselves be interrupted. True, there's a balance here in that OKRs can be a shield you can use to not do interruptions, but you do have to be sensible and you have to accept that some interruptions are important. And there's no point in completing your OKRs if the house is burning down. As always, there's a balance to be struck here, and it's going to be different for every organization and every team. But during the sprint, OKRs can be used as a shield to reinforce your focus. They can also be used to reinforce your decision making and inform that decision making. You never want your OKRs far away. In the good old days, when we all worked in offices, I used to paste the OKRs all around the team workroom. I used to put them in every meeting room. So wherever we are, where it was very easy to go to the OKRs and say, what we're doing now relates to that OKR, or what we're doing now doesn't fit with the OKRs. Just even navigating to a wiki page and opening it can be time consuming. At the end of the sprint, when you're doing a demo or you're doing a release, you should be able to demonstrate progress against OKRs. You should be able to show how the thing that you've now produced moves you onwards with the OKRs. And that is true as well when you come to the end of the sprint and you do the review and retrospective. You want to be reviewing how you've done against your OKRs. You want to be measuring progress against OKRs. You want to be feeding that into your retrospective, and your retrospective needs to consider how you're working with your OKRs. So your whole sprint cycle should be based around OKRs. Okay. How are we doing on time? Nearly. So tip number 4, key results. Think acceptance criteria. Key results. The easy way to see key results is you've got this big objective, and key results are the small pieces that are going to make up that objective. Sometimes that's true. More often, though, you want to think about key results as being the acceptance criteria. They're closer to what we in Agile know as acceptance criteria. So when you're looking at that objective, what are the criteria you're going to use to judge success? What metrics do you need to move? So, for example, I drew up this example based on some work I did with a client years ago. Suppose you're building an airline booking system, and the outcome you're looking for is to improve your revenue from ticket sales online. Your key results. So there's one measurable target in there. Revenue. Has revenue gone up by 10%? And your key results might be reduce the booking time, fewer abandoned carts, fewer calls to the helpline. So this is how we're going to judge success of whether we meet this OKR or not. Notice that it's entirely possible that you could meet those key results and miss that 10%, and vice versa. You might miss the key results and hit the 10%, because all of these are hypotheses. When this OKR has been set, there's been some thought given as to how you might make that 10%. Now, maybe someone's done a lot of research on this, or maybe it's a gut feel on this. Either way, just be open to the idea that everything here is a hypothesis of what you're shooting for. So the key results in this case are just hypothesis on what will move sales. And there's actually two ways to go about dealing with this OKR. You could think of it as three separate pieces of work. You could go away, you could write 3 stories, each one around one of those key results. One for passengers, one for booking managers, one for call center operators. That's one way of dealing with it. The other way is to see it as one piece of work to improve the airline ticket sales. And the key results are what you would see, how you would see a difference. If we improve the system, booking will be quicker, fewer carts, etc. When you think of it like that, it's the next move is to turn it into a BDD style scenario. Given the airline sells tickets online, when the booking system is improved, then bookings will be quicker, fewer carts will be abandoned, the helpline will fall, ticket sales will increase. These are testable conditions that we can go through, and you could build up an entire test suite around this. And this way of working assumes that there are improvements we will do to the system, and the team is left to decide what those improvements are, whether making it quicker is purely database optimization, or whether you need to involve changing the UI and getting users involved. Notice too, I said before, we can miss some and hit others, but something else to notice is all of these are what I call analog OKRs. You can make progress against all of these acceptance criteria and you can move forward, but you might not get to the full 10%. Some acceptance criteria, some key results tend to be binary in nature. They're do or die. These you can do partially, and that's good because A, it allows you to be more ambitious, and B, it allows you to offset some of the risk. You can say, look, we didn't make 10%, but you know what? We made 8%. Yeah. So it's less risk. If it's an all or nothing thing, it's a big risk. Okay. Final piece of advice. I'm probably going to overrun by a minute or two here. OKRs are just in time story generators. Think of OKRs rather than backlogs. Every time you need a new piece of work, every time you need a new story, every time you go into a planning meeting or a replenishment meeting, instead of going and rummaging in your backlog, look at your OKRs and say, what is the story that would move us forward on this OKR? So OKRs are this story generating machine. And every time you need a story, you turn the machine on, you generate some stories. So this means you can think strategically and you can put your outcomes over outputs. So many teams these days are lost in their backlogs. Their backlogs are massive. The idea we'll burn our backlogs down to zero is a bit of a fantasy. And they're on this constant treadmill of pulling work out of the backlog and delivering it. And they're being measured on not even stories delivered, but story points delivered. And we're all about output. And we can't see the wood for the trees. We're so lost in the backlog that we've lost all strategic thought, all focus on outcomes. We're just doing this. So by putting the OKRs at the center of our work, and by always testing whether the work we are doing will build towards an OKR, it's going to keep us strategic. So OKRs think strategically, and you let them drive all the work. You don't get out of bed in the morning if it doesn't move your OKRs forward. You don't do stories in the backlog just because they're small. You do things because they'll move you forward in OKRs. And so your OKR is a story generator. If there's something you need to do to move forward, you haven't got the story in the backlog, you damn well write it out and do it. Yes. Which all starts to head towards a question. Can you throw your backlog away? And this is perhaps the most radical piece of advice I give. And I know it unsettles a number of people. But I'm of the opinion that when you're working with OKRs, you don't necessarily need a backlog, because your measure of success is not how much backlog have we done, how much closer to zero are we. Your measure of success is in the first instance, are we making progress against our OKRs? And in the second instance, are we adding benefit to the organization, to the company purpose? And the backlog is just a means to an end. And frankly, too many teams are lost in backlog. So if we've got OKRs and we're resetting them every quarter, I would go as far as to advise you to throw your backlog away. I know that's radical. I know many of you aren't going to rush into work tomorrow and do it. It's not something you probably can do anyway. But if you move towards OKRs, you can start to ask the question, how does the backlog line up with the OKRs? Because one thing OKRs are not is some extra free work you can get in addition to the backlog. If you're working on OKRs, you're not going to get the items from the backlog. Wow. Yes, I'm just about within time. So there's my 5 pieces of advice. There's more like that in the book. And I've been working on some online tutorials that they're starting to go live. So if you want to check them out, I think there's some free downloads there. I will take a drink and you can ask some questions.
Thanks very much, Alan. And I think that went relatively well. I had some questions in the on the side as well from people saying that they had some issues with LinkedIn video. It's the first time we're trying it. I must admit, and I saw that some people had issues when they were refreshing the screen or something like that. They would go back to the live broadcast as they got delays somewhat. So that's all going back to LinkedIn. So thanks very much for that. So we have some questions here. Alan. So one question, and I'm going to read from the comments, guys. So if you want to ask more questions, now, by the way, is a good time to drop them in. And comments were slightly buggy as well, but for me, so I think I posted a couple of comments twice myself. So go ahead, and if you have any questions, post them in right now if you want. One of the questions I saw, I think, is from Martin Forzani. Is so if they're doing the work, how does it get measured? And I think you lied a little bit on that. Is that a question you can answer?
Yeah, it's fine. So I don't know about other fields, but in the software field, the funny thing is, sometimes the greatest value you can add is by doing nothing or very little. Not adding a bug, for example. So when it comes to measuring work, I think we have to step back and say, we need to measure the benefit added. We can't, if we just count stories or story points or OKRs completed, that can be useful data, but it doesn't tell a whole picture. It doesn't show whether we've made a difference to the bottom line, and it can be very misleading. So I would ask you at the end of every quarter, every OKR cycle, to step back and say, regardless of what OKRs we've hit and missed, have we added benefit to this company? Have we moved us towards that goal, the company goal? Have we furthered the purpose? If you can answer yes to them, then go back and review your OKRs and say, what did we do right here? Did our hypothesis play out? Or did we end up adding value in another way, which we hadn't realized? So yes, counting off, ticking your OKRs that you've achieved and you've not achieved, useful input to your retrospective, but measuring success should be based around benefit.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I've got another one in here. There are a couple of really, I think, a couple of really cool ones. The one just came in from Jody Blake from Durban, South Africa.
Yeah.
And it's how would one transform PBIs into OKRs?
Good question. So a couple of years ago, I was working with a large financial institution, shall we say, and we were trying to use OKRs, and meanwhile, the other coaches, all the coaches were struggling with them. And we had coffee one day, and I said, you know what? Trying to write OKRs to describe our backlog is difficult. We're going to step back. We're going to say, what's important to us? What are we trying to do here? will write OKRs independently of our backlog. And if we find that some of the backlog items can move us towards the OKRs, we'll just do them. But we won't be bound by the backlog. And she took the opposite approach, and she decided to look at the backlog items they thought they were going to do in the next quarter and reverse out OKRs which described general themes that they were going to be tackling. So in this case, OKRs are closer to sprint goals than product backlog items. I think the danger is with product backlog items, we always want small items. We want small things we can flow in, flow out, and will deliver value. And OKRs, because they're strategic, we want to think bigger. If we think of OKRs as product backlog items, we want to be thinking of dozens of them for a quarter. With OKRs, my recommendation is 3 OKRs. And if you bend my arm hard, I'll let you have 4 OKRs, 4 outcomes, and each one of them no more than 3 key results. If you bend my arm, 4 key results. But it's single digits on one hand. I've heard some people argue there should be 1 OKR. But product backlog items need to be small things. So we can attempt to write OKRs around the product backlog items we have, but I encourage you to do the opposite. I encourage you to think about your strategy, your big objectives, and then write the stories, the product backlog items that will support doing those OKRs. So it's not really transforming one into the other, it's one driving the other.
Thanks, Alan. Jody wrote back, and it's funny. I have to funnel through the comments here. Jody wrote back that's great. It's a great answer, and you've changed my thinking. So I think that's a wonderful compliment to you, Alan. Um, I have another one if we have time, guys. I have another one from Raphael. Oh yeah, that's a really good one. I think it's one of those questions that may need quite a lengthy answer. And so the question is from Raphael: do you have any general guidance on how to work with lagging indicators for key results? The biggest challenge we face is that usually the measurements we identify are not verifiable immediately at quarter end, but rather in a long timeline. And I'm smiling because I recognize this stuff, and it's hard sometimes, right?
Yeah, I recognize it too. I don't know how many of you come across this, but in the 90s, there was an American economist, was it Robert Slocum, and he said, if IT is so wonderful, why don't we see it in the productivity statistics? And what he was saying is, we spent most of the 60s and 70s and 80s investing in IT systems, and as far as the economists could see, it hadn't made any difference to GDP. There's just like nothing there. So these lagging indicators and seeing where value comes out is a really real problem. The economists think they've sorted it now, by the way, but I think you could imagine some grandiose system that says we will keep referring back to our OKRs from 3 months, 6 months, 12 months ago and see how we've done. And I think to some degree that is necessary. And I think for those people who have a business analysis background, I think this is where you can add value. I think in future, business analysts need to deal with that final loop. Are we actually delivering the value we set out to deliver? Are the products we're delivering actually making a difference? So often our test process and our feedback loops terminate once we've released once we've released something. I think we do need to go back. We do need to be retrospective. At the same time, we could really hamstrung ourselves. We're working on the final quarter's OKRs, and we're saying, hang on, the OKRs we did in the first quarter of the year. Now we look at the data, we've not matched it up. I don't think there are any simple solutions to this. I think you need to, as I say, everything's a hypothesis. And when you're closing the quarter, you probably do need to, as far as possible, you want to have forward indicators, but where they are lagging, you probably are going to need to make a judgment call, but build yourself a bigger feedback loop, a mechanism whereby people can keep going back 6 months, 12 months later and reviewing whether what you did added value. That may not change what you're doing in the short run, but in the longer term, I hope it would allow you to make more valuable decisions. Sorry, long answer for a short question.
I think that's very good. So we are out of time. We could maybe do one more question if you want, Alan. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Would that
sure.
be good? And then and to the audience, I can say that any other question that you ask in the comments, we could also go back and forth after the recording,
Yeah.
and maybe Alan can come back to you then as well. We
Yeah.
can sort of finish.
My email address is there on screen. If there's something you're burning to ask, just feel free to drop me a mail.
Yeah, great.
One more.
Yeah, one more, and I had one. Yeah, I had one more. I had one from I have one here from Anuj, and Anuj is asking quite a good question. I think in the question, his question is: should OKRs be treated as a performance evaluation tool? Have you seen that happening? If so, and of course,
Okay.
if
Okay.
we create chaos, what do you suggest? Very cool question.
Okay. There's a very clear answer to this. No, no, no. Which bit of no don't you understand?
All right.
Have I seen it happening? Yes. Have I heard about it happening? Yes. I think I find it hard to remember a book, blog, podcast. I find it hard to remember anything I have ever seen where OKR supporters to advocate linking OKRs to performance reviews and bonuses. But it seems this is an irresistible tool for HR departments to use. Faced with a nice set of objectives on a quarterly basis, HR departments seem to be unable to resist the urge to link bonuses and remuneration and all the other stuff to it. But nobody says, does it? If you get my book, some of the later chapters, I talk about some of the problems with OKRs and some of what's called goal displacement and unintended consequences. And once you start attaching money and performance appraisals to OKRs, you completely undermine the system. But getting that message through is incredibly hard.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're a little bit over time. I was saying we're way over time. So thanks, thanks a lot, Alan. Thanks very much. So everyone, Alan's details are here in the slide, and I think that's everything from us, right? Thanks
Brilliant.
very much for joining. I think the questions went well, and yeah, the recording will remain online as a LinkedIn video. If we haven't said anything strange, stupid. So that's it from us. Thanks very much, guys, and give a follow to Lithe Transformation if you'd like on LinkedIn. So we have another couple of interesting sessions coming up in the coming months, mostly on Tuesdays and Wednesday evenings, afternoons, Europe time, UK time. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.